I'm experiencing insane creative block right now, which is funny because if I was taking my own advice, I'd probably be way further ahead. In today's video, I'm going to talk about what this missing piece is, and hopefully it will help you in your creative block as well. But first, hello, my name's Mr. Tom Froese. I'm an illustrator and a top teacher on Skillshare, where I've helped over 105,000 students unlock the world of commercial illustration. Welcome to the channel. As always, if this video helps you, please let me know with a like and a comment, as long as you feel that I've earned it. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new videos drop. I try to launch a new one each week. Finally, please consider supporting this channel by becoming a Patreon supporter. For only $3 monthly, you get full access to my community of illustration learners on Discord, plus monthly patrons-only live streams. Just this week, in the May live stream, my patrons got to watch me work on an actual editorial illustration project. If you're looking to connect with fellow illustrators and gaining more of a behind-the-scenes view of my own work, please visit patreon.com/tomfroese and join today. Okay, let's get into the content. In 15 days, I'll be delivering a talk at Design Thinkers, a design conference in Vancouver. I'll be speaking to an audience of designers, marketers, freelancers, students, and God knows who else on the topic of making work you're actually good at. This is the title that I pitched. So when I pitched this talk to the conference back in January, I hadn't really thought it completely through. Since I've started actually trying to write it, I found that, well, it's a really hard thing to write about. Ironically enough, I'm finding I'm not very good at writing it. So that's kind of a problem. As I tend to do with most of my talking type work, especially teaching and live talks like the one I'll be delivering in a couple of weeks, I tend to write and write and write, moving from brainstorms onto large sheets of paper, to writing smaller ideas on cue cards that I tape up on my wall, to typing out essays, and then go back to doing point form outlines on my computer. Instead of homing in on what I want to say, I keep expanding and littering my consciousness with more and more fodder for the talk, and I become overwhelmed. Things grow confused and muddled rather than clearer. So my expectation in this kind of process, if you can call it that, is that I'll become more and more certain about what I'm saying and then have clear points to support it as a sort of outline, and then all I have to do is fill it all in. You know, I'm pretty confident at writing. Like, I know that once I have a clear path to follow, I can write. It's just a matter of getting those key points in place. The reality, unfortunately, is that as I write out my points, my brain kind of forks into many extra possible things I could say. These are things that I feel could be related to my overall topic, and then I wonder how it all fits together. I'm trying to link ideas together and lead them all toward a singular idea that I want to get across, but instead I get something more like multiple voices all talking at once in my head. It's kind of like a bottleneck where I have all this stuff inside me that I want to pour out through a narrow neck, like out of a spout in a clean, controlled flow. But instead it gets all stuck there where the broader part of the bottle meets the narrow neck part, and it's like creative constipation. So today, that's kind of where I stand. I have a lot of great ideas that I know could be good, but I have yet to find a way of focusing them in a meaningful, digestible way. On one hand, I have a lot of confidence that I have a lot of value to offer in my talk, and on the other, I'm completely stuck with exactly what my point is and how to deliver anything at all. What's ironic is that I'm facing the exact thing that I'm constantly trying to help others with. This feeling of indecision, of facing extreme possibility, and therefore extreme anxiety about how to choose just one thing and move forward with confidence. It's easy to say, just choose something and focus on that. But when faced with so many options and not a lot of experience in making such choices, at every step there only seems to be a sense of doubt. This is what happens almost every time I do a talk or start to write a class. It's actually pretty dreadful. So yesterday things came to a head for me. I was determined at 8 a.m. when I started my daily writing time that I was finally going to nail it. I had done all the hard work and struggle, and now my baby was ready to come out. But the exact same thing happened again. Lots of forking out of ideas and possibilities, which means more writing and notes that I'll never read because there's too much of it, and I don't have time or patience or attention enough to go through it all. And besides, even if I did, I still wouldn't know how to bring it all together in a nice cohesive talk. With the presentation day looming closer and closer, I knew I had to do something different. So I wrote an email as a sort of cry for help to someone who's helped me edit my classes before. Her name's Julia. I didn't want to involve someone else at first, but I finally realized I kind of needed to. I was out of options. I don't like involving others because sometimes I have a hard time saying what I'm thinking, and I feel like not only am I getting more confused myself, but I'm also confusing the person I'm sharing with. In other words, I haven't up until yesterday felt ready to share my ideas with anyone. Anyway, next week I'm scheduled to actually chat things through with Julia, and I know it's going to be hard and I'm going to feel vulnerable and maybe things will get confusing before they become clear. But so far, keeping things to myself hasn't really been working, so this is absolutely necessary and it's better than nothing. Now, just in the very act of reaching out to someone and asking for a few hours of my time, I started to think more clearly about this whole thing, the thing that I'm writing about. I started to think more like a problem solver. I now knew that in order to have a meaningful talk with Julia, in order for her to be able to help me, I needed to give her some context, basically describing the problem, including the context of the talk, the story so far with what I'm struggling with and stuff like that. Just in knowing that I had to talk about this with someone else, I started getting out of my head and doing something more meaningful. I almost immediately started seeing things more clearly. The most important thing to do at this point is to define the problem. What am I trying to do, and what are the things that are specifically standing my way? I needed to get away from being like a few inches away from my work and stand back and see the bigger picture, and maybe not really focus on trying to write or create any new content, but more just assess like what really is happening here, what's getting me stuck. So last night, in this moment of clarity, I started to define the problem and listing specific things that were standing in the way of my solution. If you can identify a problem, this is halfway to the solution. You know, if you can name your enemy, you'll be way more likely to defeat him. In preparation for chatting with Julia, I started writing out my problem as an email specifically to her. It's amazing how much easier it is to write an email to someone than to just write something in a document on my computer to nobody in particular. You know, suddenly by doing this, things became quite clear to me. It's not that I have my talk all sorted yet, but the reason I'm getting stuck became very clear to me. What's interesting is that as an illustrator, I almost never encounter creative block in this way. When working on client work, I get the job done relatively stress-free, on time, every time. So how is this? How can I solve creative problems so easily as an illustrator, but not at all easily as a writer and a speaker? The obvious answer is probably that I don't have a clear process for writing like I do for commercial illustration work. My illustration process is so buttoned down that I even have an entire class about it called The 6 Stages of Illustration, Leading Clients Through Your Art. The idea here is that having a routine that you go through every time you do creative work is the key for not going insane, to borrow a favorite quote from one of my illustration heroes, Christoph Niemann. As a self-styled expert in the creative process, why am I finding it so hard to create this talk? Speaking on creativity to a creative audience should be easy. So I asked myself, what if I wrote my talk using the same steps as my illustration process? What would that look like? I started to go through the 6 stages of my process, from onboarding to understanding, then to ideation and realization, delivery, and closing. Perhaps I didn't think to use this process for writing at first because it's so illustration specific, but it turns out there are parallels at every stage, and by asking what the writing equivalents to my illustration stages are, I started to make some very important discoveries. I won't go through all the stages of my process today, but I do want to focus on just one very important piece for my illustration process that's been missing in my writing process, which, if I can incorporate it, I know I'll blast through creative block and at very minimum deliver a passable talk. So what is this missing piece? It's the client. In my 6S illustration process, the whole thing is predicated on a two-sided relationship between the illustrator and their client. Yes, much of the actual creative work must be done by you as the artist, and the very title of my class, or the subtitle, is Leading Clients Through Your Art. The art is your job, but your job is for the client. So the client comes into the process not only as the end recipient of your work, but also throughout the process at key checkpoints. So what are these checkpoints? First, the client is the very instigator of the work. They're the one who approaches you in the first place and gives you the assignment. Second, the client must see some preliminary work, in this case, rougher sketches, before you can move on to later stages where the actual artwork gets fleshed out. While it's our job to come up with ideas and solve the creative problem, it's a client's job actually to tell us that we're on the right track and offer either critical feedback or give that final stamp of approval to move on to the next stage. As an illustrator, I know my craft down to a science. I know what tools I use, I have a defined style, I have various things that I know I bring to my work, and I have a proven 10-year-long track record of working with clients all around the world. At the same time, I don't have very much confidence in anything I'm making unless I have a sense that it's working for the client. It's not that I don't think my art will be good in every sense of the word, but I'm not going to feel fully certain about pouring myself into the final artwork, for instance, unless I know the client has approved the concept. Otherwise, I have no guarantee at all, after all the effort of finalizing a piece, that the client will change their mind and ask me to do something totally different. As my own client in this writing process that I'm talking about, that's exactly what I keep doing. I keep changing my mind. That's one of the biggest pain points for illustrators. The client keeps changing their mind. In my illustration work, I'm never my own client. My clients are my clients. So that's the missing piece in writing my talk, and that's why my entire process is messy and jumbled and causes me to grow overwhelmed with options and ideas. My problem is not that I have too few ideas, but that I have too many and I have no process for choosing just one and then taking it to the next step. A client acts as a sort of focusing mechanism. They give me a person to focus on creating for, if that makes sense. They give me a sense of accountability. If I have to show up and communicate ideas to a real client, I have to have fully thought through ideas and be able to explain myself if necessary. Without a client, I allow myself to be more loose and vague and scattered. The client not only acts as a focal point, but also as a sort of filter to pass ideas through. It's through the client's initial brief and then through their feedback on my ideas later on that I can continue to focus my own efforts toward the final illustration. So who really will be my client when I'm the speaker? Is it the conference who has invited me to speak? Well, I don't think it's right to treat the conference organizers as a client. I suspect they expect me to come on presentation day with a talk ready to deliver to their paying attendees. So if it's not the conference that's my client, maybe it's the audience. But how could I even know who that is yet? Do I go on Twitter and ask if anyone's attending and then ask if they can stand in as a client in my creative writing process? Again, I don't actually think that's a thing, but it's kind of the right idea if you think about it. It's kind of like a smaller testing audience. But the risk of asking strangers for their feedback is a little bit too risky for my taste. I don't want feedback from just anybody. I need someone I can trust, someone with whom I can be vulnerable and rely on for pointed feedback. So in this case, I've decided that my client is Julia. Julia, my editor, will be my sounding board. She'll stand in as the client and be there for all the important check-in points that I have in my creative process. In previous videos and some of my classes, I talk about the importance of not jumping straight into final illustrations. You need to spend some time sketching out ideas and developing them in pencil before moving into the final. In the 6 stages of illustration, I identify 2 key check-in points with a client, both of which are necessary before moving on to the next. The first check-in point is the ideation or sketches stage. You should show your client your best 1 to 3 ideas, and then they choose one that works best. And then from there, they'll either offer feedback for you to incorporate in a revised sketch, or they'll approve it, which gives you the confidence to move forward with the finished artwork. For a talk, I think the equivalent to sketches is having a proposed title, a thesis, and some supporting points in a sort of loose outline. I might just have one idea for a talk, or maybe a handful, and then I can share these with my standing client to see which one they think is the strongest, and then they'll offer some feedback on my overall ideas. Whether they have feedback or not, I really need to hear from them that my ideas are sound and that they're worth fleshing out as a fuller talk. I need the client's approval. The second point is in the realization or finished artwork stage. Again, you want to check in with your client before sending them the finished artwork files because there may be some things you missed. We're so close to our work that we often miss things, and it takes someone on the outside to point it out. Again, whether we get feedback or not, we need the client to approve the work before moving on to the next stage, which in this case would be delivering the files. For a talk, of course, the equivalent to finals would be my fleshed out presentation and slideshow. So I would actually have all the things I'm going to talk about written down as an outline and an actual slideshow with images that will accompany it. For almost all my past talks, I've sort of written out my talk and built my slideshow concurrently. The problem with this approach is that as I do this, I never quite know where I'm going, so I'm not quite sure when I'm finished. This is just like how I used to approach illustration as a beginner. Rather than spending time with the sketches and working out my ideas in rougher form, I would start trying to build the final art right away. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't, but along the way there's almost an unbearable amount of uncertainty and doubt and lack of forward moving direction. There's a lot of just moving something here, then moving it back, then moving it here, then moving it back. If I worked that out in the sketches, I wouldn't be doing this in the finals stage. So these two stages, sketches and finals, are so important in my illustration process that without them, I simply couldn't do this for a living. I couldn't be an illustrator. And these stages always require some outside feedback in order for me to know if I'm on the right track. Without a client standing on the other side of the creative process, there's nothing but doubt. You know, while the act of generating rougher sketches before going into more finished artwork is clearly important, the secret ingredients that actually make the work stronger and clear away any doubt in my mind are feedback and approval. Feedback and approval are what the client brings. That's the value a client brings to the creative process, aside from, actually also assigning us the work and paying us. Their ability to give us feedback and approval is exactly what we need. So feedback, we all know what feedback from a client is, but maybe we have kind of a negative view of it. We always think that it's kind of somehow meddlesome or unwelcome. But feedback is like the resistance we need to build up strength. When working out, we need weights that are a little heavier than we're comfortable with, and it's by pushing against this resistance that we become stronger. The resistance feels hard. In some ways it could feel like an enemy, but it's exactly what we need to grow. But sometimes there's too much resistance and we simply can't lift it. But far too often that resistance comes from within, not from outside, and it comes in the form of doubt. And that's where approval comes in. When a client approves our sketches and finals, they give us the confidence we need to move forward, knowing that our efforts will be worth it. So when we get feedback, it's a positive or a good form of resistance, but this doubt is negative or bad resistance. And it's approval that helps us push past it. So what might bad resistance look like? Maybe we're just pushing when we should be pulling. If you've ever pulled a door that should actually be pushed, you know that feeling. At first you feel weak and you feel locked out, but then you push and you realize it had nothing to do with strength. We need feedback and approval in order to push forward in our creative work. Without these, there's only internal feedback loops of doubt and struggle. Unless we're highly self-assured in our work and we kind of just don't care, we simply can't make creative work without these things, approval and feedback. Now, just as an aside, I do think we need to be experts at what we do. I think we need to have mastered our craft, and that it's up to us how to use our craft to solve the creative problems that come to us. Nobody wants a client who stands over our shoulders and gives us art direction. And we shouldn't be looking for their approval in the grander scheme of things, such as like validating us as humans or as artists, but we can and should rely on them to validate our ideas and our work in the specific context of the assignments they bring to us. So anyway, that's my insight for today, that in order to move forward in our creative work, we need our client's to give us feedback and ultimate approval in order to fully feel confident in moving forward. It's through the dialogue with our clients that we're able to channel our creative energy in a specific way on a specific problem. Clients help us navigate through the many possibilities and land on just one that works. As for my talk, I'm currently in a better spot than I was yesterday. I've defined my current problem, which is not that I lack material or ideas, but simply need an outside person to give me some much needed feedback and approval. It's just a matter of someone saying, you know, Tom, those are good ideas, go with them. And perhaps as a helpful byproduct of bringing someone in to stand in as my client is the sense that I'm writing for a specific person rather than the vague notion of an audience. It's always good to write for a specific person. It's always good to design for a specific client. It's always good to illustrate for a specific client. Once you have someone in mind that you're working with or for, it makes things a lot clearer and more real. It's funny how I style myself as an expert on the creative process, but I don't take my own advice. Anyway, if you're interested in watching the talk in person, it will be at Design Thinkers on this June 1st, 2022. For more information about the conference and about how to get tickets, I'll leave a link in the video description. If you want to learn more about my Skillshare class, The 6 Stages of Illustration, you can find it and all my other classes at tomfroese.com/teaching. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Please remember to like and subscribe to help this video reach more folks who might need to see this message today. That's all I have. I'll see you in the next one.